What do you do when you have time on your hands? Lots of it. This is a real challenge in retirement. What do you do with all those hours? Decide to be your own boss and move forward with zero guilt and zero regrets. Tune in to Fresh Courage Radio. It's your time to shine with host Sharon Rolfe on Transformation Talk Radio. We all have something special to share with the world, but many of us fail to use our innate talents to the fullest possible potential. Communities, cities, and nations grow stronger when everyone brings forward their unique gifts and talents to build and to create. We're creating with a freedom we never had before. It's not a trap. It's not a dream. You really are free. Time is your key to unlocking a life kept in waiting. Let's get started. There's no time to waste on Fresh Courage Radio with Sharon Rolfe now.
I'm your host, Sharon Rolfe, and you are listening to Fresh Courage, coming to you on the Transformation Talk Radio network. And I am here to help inspire you to do something daily that brings you health, wealth, and happiness. Today's topic is beating off isolation. I'm getting to be on a soapbox about isolation because there's so much negative things that happen in our lives because we get isolated, or when we get isolated. It can happen to all of us, and it's kind of the precursor to depression and declining health. So shoo, get away. I don't want isolation in my life. And Shelley Parks is here to talk to us about that. She has spent a career in the retirement living management area, and in 2015 she began to ask herself a very good question, thinking outside the box. How can we do this better? This question has led her to a quest that brought her to cohousing. Shelley now consults with emerging co-housing groups all over the United States and Canada, and her driving goal is to ensure that people have the opportunity to live their best lives in community, the opposite of isolation. So, Shelley, welcome to our program.
Oh, thanks, Sharon. It's so great to be here.
And what are we going to learn today? There's a lot of talk about the harmful effects of isolation, and you're hoping to combat that with your work in co-housing communities getting built, right?
That is correct. That is true.
So tell us, what's co-housing?
Yeah, people always have all kinds of, when they first hear the term, they're like, is that a commune? So the first answer is no, it is not a commune. So co-housing is where people come together very intentionally and collaboratively to create a neighborhood where everyone has their own private homes. But there is also a lot of extensive common space built in to really allow people to come together and connect with each other. And I've heard some people describe it as an old-fashioned neighborhood with a modern twist.
Sounds good to me. And I love collaboration. So that again is kind of the opposite of isolation. Cool. So sometimes people get co-housing confused with co-living. It's not the same, is it?
Yeah, that's true. A lot of times people get those terms mixed up because there's a lot of terms out there now, right, that have the co in front of them because we all want to be figuring this out about how do we live better together. So co-living is when people live together in a house. Basically, they share a house together. Co-housing, again, is where everyone has their own private home. And it's really important, because I think many of us really, we crave privacy, and it's important for us to have those moments where we can have privacy. But there's the problem that we also need to be together, right, and to be working together and living together. So co-housing offers us a way to do that.
So co-living often mean things like eating together, playing together, kind of thing.
Yeah, you do the same in co-housing, right? I just, the big difference is, do you want to live in a house and share, maybe one kitchen and maybe you have a bedroom and you share a big house, or do you want to have your own private home and live in more of a neighborhood type setting? And that
So
would be the difference between the two.
so there's choices. So,
Mhm.
what's your role in co-housing movement?
Yeah, so back in 2016, you mentioned in your introduction that I just really was obsessed with that question of how do we do this better? I think I'm a big fan of the retirement living industry, and we certainly need supportive services. But I think most of us don't grow up thinking that our goal in life is to move to a retirement community. So so then we think, okay, well, we want to stay independent, and then that looks like staying in our homes, and of course then that leads to isolation, what we're talking about. So when I was in that world working, I just was really obsessed with that question of how do we do this better? How do we live better? How do we age better? What does that look like? And in my quest, I stumbled upon co-housing, and I felt like the night that I found it, it was just a Google search when I was trying to, answer the question. And I'll never forget that night because I remember thinking that, oh, that's what so many of us have in our head, some version. But there was actually a format for making it happen. So I left my really wonderful retirement living career, and now work with groups that are co-housing groups that want to get themselves off the ground.
Boy, talk about courage, leaving your career. Wow.
Yes, it was. It was a scary leap of faith.
And oftentimes, like I think I sometimes have talked about vulnerability is taking a leap of faith without well, showing up and being seen without any guarantee of the outcome. So that's that leap of faith where whatever is going to show up, I'm ready for it, and I often think it's magic.
Yeah, yeah.
So how did you first get involved?
Well, that night I discovered it on the internet. I realized that in a few months later there was going to be a national conference that was down in Salt Lake City, and it just happened that that conference was focused on senior co-housing, and so I thought, oh, that ties right in with this question that I'm asking. So I dashed off to Salt Lake City and went to the national conference, and I was really inspired by the idea that we can live better lives if we commit to living together than we will if we hang on to that belief that I will live best by being independent and isolated in my home, right? So yeah, that's kind of how I got started.
Well, yeah, us boomers like our independence, don't we?
We
And the thing beyond independence, I think, is interdependence.
Mhm.
And that's kind of being built into this community, right?
Yeah, it is because you do come together and you commit. Typically co-housing gets built by people coming together and dreaming about it, and then they'll partner with professionals where needed, but they're the ones that make it happen, and that is a very collaborative thing to do. A lot of hard work, but I have experienced that it's probably one of the most rewarding things I've ever done. Yeah,
Really?
absolutely. Yeah,
Wow. How
yeah.
many are there of these currently or in the process of being built?
Yeah, there are about 165 that are up and running across the United States, and about the same amount that are in some stage of formation across the country.
Mhm. So when did it start and how?
Yeah, so originally got started in Denmark,
Oh.
and it's the great story of just a group of neighbors that were trying to figure out how do we connect better. What could we do to create a neighborhood that would be more like the neighborhood that we all desire and want to live in. And so
Mhm.
they very intentionally started to figure that out. And shortly thereafter, there were a couple of Americans, Chuck Durrett and Katie McCammett, who were studying architecture in Denmark and learned about it. And then, came back to the United States and brought it back to the United States and and have really been instrumental. They wrote a number of books and very instrumental in getting the movement to happen. So it's been around for about 30 years here in the United States.
Whoa.
Yeah,
Oh,
and taking off now. I think there's a lot because, like you said, baby boomers are, we're really the first generation that had parents age. We experienced our parents aging, whereas I know my parents didn't experience their parents aging because they, passed away much younger. So I think we are asking those questions and looking for new ways of living better.
so it's really a public culture change that we're heading into new territory, right?
Yeah, yeah. Well, we're craving it, right? We're living in a culture where we're divided.
Yeah.
And it's hard to connect with your friends. I think about this a lot. When I want to get together with a friend, I usually pull up my calendar and she pulls up her calendar and we, try to figure out when could we find time to get together for dinner. And it's just a lot of work. It's a lot of work to maintain friendships. And, when you live in co-housing, they're designed in a way that there's a lot of opportunities for connection and also spontaneous interactions. For instance, you pass someone on the walkway, as you're going to get your mail, and you have that opportunity to say, "Hey, Sharon, how'd your visit go with your sister last week?" So it's just that way to really connect.
Well, and it's interesting that I've even noticed one day I was feeling a little bit, like maybe I was starting to get a bug. And when I went out for my walk, I ran into my neighbor down the street and chatted with her a little bit. And I was surprised when I came home, I felt better.
Mm.
Having noticed how I felt beforehand and afterhand, it's like maybe that little visit was health inspiring, and how cool is that?
Yeah, yeah.
So, when we come back, we're going to be talking more about this co housing. Shelley has some personal experiences, and let's talk with her about how that is coming along for her living in her co housing uh, dream. And so, stay tuned to Fresh Courage with Sharon and Kelly Parks. You're listening to Fresh Courage on Transformation Talk Radio, and I'm your host, Sharon Rolfe, with my guest today, Shelley Parks, and we're beating back isolation. That's the name of our show today, topic. And let's see. Shelley, we were talking about how you got involved in co-housing, and you have some personal experience now where you're planning on this. Tell us how's that going and what your experience has been for you personally then.
Yeah, after I discovered co-housing and answered that question of, oh, this is how we could do this better, I started thinking, gosh, maybe I should start my own community, or maybe look to one that's just in the early stages of formation. So a couple years ago, my husband and I joined Skagit Co-housing, which is a developing community that is going to be built in Anacortes, Washington. And it's been pretty powerful to join a group of people that are really committed to making community together. We're designing the neighborhood with an architect, and committing to each other to be really great neighbors. And we expect to be built sometime in 2021.
So you had to actually go on, like, find some acreage. And does most co-housing start by new building then, or can it be existing building?
Yeah, it can be existing. Sometimes people will find something they can retrofit. Oftentimes, though, groups will find, land that they can build on, and they'll design a community because it is a very intentional design. Cars are typically in the, outside of the community, and the neighborhood is built in such a way that you're, looking at your neighbor, not hiding yourself from your neighbor.
Oh, okay. Yeah, and, I think when we talked before, you said that there's, like, uh, the where you share meals or share gaming area or even even uh, considerations are made for sharing bedrooms, so not everybody has to have a spare room for guests to come.
Yeah, yeah,
Anything
yeah.
else like that?
Yeah, it's typical for a co-housing community to create what's called a common house. And in the common house, you would have a large dining room and a kitchen. And remember, everybody's got their own kitchen and their own home.
Okay, okay,
But then there would be a common house that would have, a larger kitchen. And the idea is that you come together once, twice, three times, a few times a week for shared meals. And it's typically not mandatory that you would do that. It's just a way for you to come together as a community, because we all know what it's like, right, to sit across the
mm,
table with a friend or a neighbor. It gives you that opportunity to connect and to chat and just share your lives. And oftentimes then in that common house you'll build in guest suites, so that everybody is not forced to be building their own homes with their own guest rooms. Instead, it's so much smarter, and we can live lighter on the planet by creating spaces that we don't need all the time but can share. So we'll at Skagit Co-housing, we have built in a couple of guest suites that we all can use as people that live in this community for our friends and family who come to visit.
yeah, there seems like there's several ads right now about only pay for what you use, whether it be cars or insurance or whatever. So this kind of goes along with that same kind of vein, isn't it?
Yeah, I think, so many people really understand that why do we all need our own lawnmower, right? If we can share a lawnmower, whatever that is. So the idea that it just makes sense for us to be sharing where we can.
Mhm. So, what has been the most surprising thing that you've experienced with co-housing?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I think about this a lot. I think for me personally, as one who's experiencing co-housing, and again, we don't have the physical building. We are just now coming together as a group of people, but community begins to form even though we're not living there yet. And I would have to say that the really profound, deep relationships that have formed, and let me see if I can articulate this, because it is different. I think in our normal lives, we're drawn towards people that we know we would like to be friends with, right?
Mhm,
If we
mhm.
meet someone that maybe we don't necessarily connect with, we're probably not going to make that effort to really commit and connect with that person. In co-housing, you don't have that luxury, right? Because you're just a group of regular people coming together. And so of course, some people you're drawn to more, but others maybe in the outside world, outside of co-housing, you wouldn't necessarily take the time to get to know them. But when you're in an intentional community together, you're saying, I commit to being a great neighbor to you. And I find that, that commitment to really listening to each other, and caring about each other, um, and that commitment that we understand that we will live better together than we will alone, it can be really deeply transforming. And I know I've had to struggle with that at times, because sometimes it's not easy. It's about relationships. And I think the other thing that I have found is co-housing typically models or governs itself with a consensus model. And certainly in our culture, that's not something that we're comfortable with often. And it takes a lot of work. And what I find is that it creates a space for everyone to be heard. There's not just a couple few with the loudest voices, or maybe they're on the board of directors that are the ones that are making things happen. Instead, you're saying, I will listen to everyone and I will take into account their viewpoint. And that has made a much richer life for me, by
Mm.
taking the time um, to stop talking, and to listen, and and to understand that there might be people that might really surprise me with what they have to share. And it's deeply humbling, I would say. And that's been powerful. It's been powerful for both. I know my husband would say the same. We talk about this a lot.
So there's no power plays, there's no egos, right?
Well, there are, of course, right? Because we are all a group of humans. So I would love to say, oh, it's rosy, but that's the challenge, right? Because you are saying we choose to try to not have that. And I know, like for us at Skagit Co-housing, we have invested, we've paid money for trainers to come in and train us on how do we do this better. So, we've invested in learning how to do it. And yeah, it's bumpy at times. But you can't, you can't, if I get upset with a friend or a family member, I can just choose to not call them. If I live in community
Yeah.
with someone, I'm going to see them next week at our general meeting, or when we live together, I'm going to run into them at the common house meal. So I have to figure it out with that person, and that's very that's powerful.
Very deliberate choice then.
Hmm. Yeah,
Yeah.
it is.
So what kind of person could be attracted to co-housing?
Hmm. I would say that you have to be very proactive, and willing to put yourself out there. I think what the thoughts I just shared kind of highlight that. You need to be really curious, and able to think beyond, what your individual thoughts are. I think you need to really be willing to share yourself with others, to be vulnerable. You used that term earlier
Mhm.
today. And and all those things sometimes take a lot of work, so you have to be willing to do that. Uh, and you just have such a richer life if you're willing to do that, I believe.
Well, yeah, 'cause, it made me think of, just on Saturday, I had, picked up I do Lyft driving on the side, and I picked up this, group of people that were from, Colombia. Now, they're visiting their son. I guess their son lives here in Seattle, and they actually live right now in Minnesota, but the lady happened to be vulnerable enough to say, "Well, we're from Colombia." And it was kind of one of those situations where I could be curious, or, I'm usually the first one to be vulnerable. For her to share that with me just really touched me. And, it turned out that, when I told her about my podcast, that she has a neighbor that's in this kind of or soon to be in this situation,
Mhm,
and, it ended up being a rich conversation, but, had there not been the vulnerability and the willing to listen and being curious, I like that word
mhm,
curious
mhm,
a lot, and from what I'm reading about how to age well, um, learning and being curious and being in community, those are all very powerful things for helping us to age
mhm,
very well.
mhm. Yeah, I think we've all been with people that have, become very self-centered as they've become older, right? And I think that's a product of isolation. It's if you
Mhm.
have to be thinking of others, you're going to be much more, willing to not be thinking of yourself. So, yeah.
Yeah, yeah, I often think about my sister when she had a real bad accident where some her fingers were, severed. She remembers say people said, "You can become bitter or you can become
Mhm.
better." And I think, older people, the other generation ahead of us, they were often bitter or better, and we wanna do it differently.
And it's a choice that we have to make, isn't it?
Yes,
Because if we're
yes.
not, if we just let it happen to us, we're going to be stuck. I used to see that in my retirement living days. Is people always thought that they would create a plan at some point, but then all of a sudden, they can't take care of the house. Their house is too big. They have a fall or something, and all of a sudden, it's not pretty at that point.
Mm. So is co-housing only for older adults, or what ages are usually signing up for this?
Yeah, you see all ages in co-housing. I think it's a great way for young families with kids to raise their kids, because they can create a really supportive environment for their family. But there are many co-housing communities that are 55 plus kind of focused, and And oftentimes they're very intentional in that focus. They're coming together saying, we really understand that we will do better in community as we age. So we
Mhm.
will create that environment. In fact, I was visiting with Quimper Village over in Port Townsend one time, and they just happened to have this most amazing impromptu conversation about what would it look like, what do they want it to look like for them at the end of life, and to sit around this table and hear people, in their 70s and 80s talking about it within a group of people in an impromptu way, right? I wish I would have been able to record that conversation because I was inspired by it. They were sharing their wishes and their thoughts with their friends, and yeah.
Talk about vulnerable.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're having a great conversation with Kelly Parks talking with us about co-housing. So stay tuned. When we come back, we'll ask her some more intriguing questions. Today's program, we're talking about um, combating isolation, and I'm Sharon Rolfe with our guest Shelley Parks, talking about co-housing and how this is a great solution for creating community and beating back isolation. We don't want that in our lives, and it can be a real challenge since us boomers are so independent. Let's become interdependent, and that's a great application for co-housing. So, um, we've heard in the news, Shelley, about how smoking a pack of cigarettes a day is bigger health risk than, I mean, isolation is bigger risk than isolation. Tell us more about what you know of that.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if it's, I know I think we've all seen the news about how isolation is a big health risk for us all. And, I think that if each one of us think about in our own lives, I think we've all known someone who, it all happens to us, right? As we get older, maybe we don't like to drive at night anymore, you know? So all of a sudden, the only times we can go connect with our, the people that we care about in our lives is during daylight hours. And then maybe, I think my mother at one point, she just realized she wasn't safe to drive anymore. She didn't feel comfortable. So she gave up her driver's license. And when that happened, she had to always rely on others. So I think, if we have a life where we don't intentionally create a way where we're not isolated, then we run that risk of having that, it's like might as well take up smoking a couple packs of cigarettes a day, right? you know, I mean, it's isolation is not good for us. And I think about, Sharon, earlier on this talk today, you talked about running into your neighbor and how you felt better. I think, if all of us are kind of mindful of how we
Yes.
feel when we connect
Mhm,
with people,
mhm.
that will let us know that, yeah, I'm not going to be good if I sit in my house alone every day and not talk with people.
Well, and another new thing that I don't know how prevalent it is, but I have run into some changes in some of the Medicare coverage that may include Lyft transportation for people with chronic illnesses. Whether it's confined to just taken to the hospital or doctor's appointments, I'm not clear about. But for Medicare to break open that door and say, There are times we may be willing to cover that, getting out and being somewhat social, in at least for your health reasons, is monumental kind of shift. So I like
Yep.
that.
Yeah, and I would, and so circling back to co-housing by what you just said, that's work, right? If we have to get in our car to go visit our friend for coffee, that's work. That's you have to make an effort. And
Deliberate.
again,
Yeah, yeah.
deliberate, and maybe you don't feel great that morning. And that's just it's again, going back to that question of how do we create lives where it's easy to interact with each other. It's it's easy to have neighbors that you could, knock on the door if you need a cup of sugar. Or, I was one of the visions I have in my head is I love to go for walks, but oftentimes I don't plan ahead. I walk by myself because, but imagine if I lived in a co-housing community, as I will in a couple of years, and the night before I happened to sit across the table with you, Sharon, and you mentioned, yeah, I'm going to be home all day tomorrow. And I wake up in the morning and it's beautiful, sunny, and I'm going to go ask Sharon if she wants to go for a walk. That's easy, right? We could just then head off for a walk together. So it just, how do we create a way where we don't have to work at not being isolated, where it's just easier.
Well, and while you were saying that, eating dinners together,
Mm-hmm.
to look in people's eyeballs, or and see how their skin is, or you can see if they're you know how well they're feeling just by eyeball to eyeball, and
Yeah.
that kind of thing. That it seems like seems natural with caring, but you can't do that as easily on the phone, or I haven't used Snapchat or FaceTime yet, but, when you're sitting across the table from someone, it's so easy to seem to care
Yeah.
spontaneously.
Yep, and taking that to another level. So, my husband and I live in a condo building where we don't know our neighbors, right? So, because we don't know them, just the way it's built, it's designed, and nobody wants to know each other here. We when I don't know them well enough to read their body language, but again, imagine, Sharon, if you and I lived in a co-housing community, we would know each other. So I would know if you were in a rush because you had to, get on one of these calls. I could read that in your body language, that that it would, you could just walk by me and I'd say, "Hey, hope the call goes well," and you would have that quick moment, versus where we don't know each other and we can't read the language of each other, because
Mhm.
that's important too. And I think, one of the things that people are always surprised about with co-housing is they think that it's extroverts that are going to want to live in co-housing. And there was a study done that more introverts live in co-housing than extroverts. And I think it's because I'm an introvert, so I can speak to this. We understand that, we better create a way to have connections with people,
Mhm.
or we're just going to, self isolate ourselves and, hole up on our.
I'm with you there, because well, and I like to do creative things, and creative types you need that alone time in order to be doing your creativity.
Yep, yep.
So how would if someone was interested in co-housing, what words of advice do you have?
Yeah, I would say to be prepared for personal growth. Um, we already talked about this a little bit, but living in community puts you in a place where you've got to often examine your own motives. And I think that can be hard sometimes.
Mhm.
And I think, um, yeah, I would just think that, we all want purpose in our lives. And that often takes work. So, if someone's interested in co-housing, I think just say, "Am I open to a new experience?" Curious. We talked about that at the beginning of the show.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Mhm. So, you have a couple stories that illustrate, the what you learned firsthand. Can you share us a couple stories?
Yeah, I have a moment that when I mentioned that I had gone to the conference in Salt Lake City, and I was new to co-housing, and one of the things they offered was the opportunity to go tour a co-housing community. My very first one that I saw in person. And I was new to it all, so I had my own stereotypes in my head of what kind of person would live in co-housing. And so we were put into small groups. I was a group of about 5 people touring with a gentleman that lived there giving us a tour. And he was just very grumpy and kind of difficult. And I remember through the whole tour thinking, gosh, that's fascinating that he lives in co-housing. And at the end of the tour, someone in the group asked him why he lived in co-housing. And he said, "Well," he goes, "you might have noticed I'm not the nicest guy." That's what he said. And he said, "So every morning before I get out of the bed, I think to myself, how can I be the best husband to my wife? How can I be the best father to my children? And how can I be the best neighbor to my neighbors? Because I wouldn't naturally ask myself that question. And
Mm.
community forces me to ask that question. And I think that for me was a turning point. I mean, I that's when I realized that yeah, that there's this opportunity for us to continue to grow and to be the best, the best person we can be in the world, in a very supportive environment. So yeah, that stuck with me.
Yeah, I love people pursuing a purpose, and I've never married and never had kids, so being putting myself into a housing situation where I'm naturally around children, I think would be such a different life and a rewarding because kids have a way of bringing out the best in us kind of naturally, or testing us, and we're
Mm.
both learning from each other. But to have that happen spontaneously, I think is part of that magic that life brings to us.
Yeah. And again, right? It's like how do we live in an old-fashioned neighborhood with a modern twist? How do we do that?
Mhm. And is there gives a lot of room for give and take,
Mhm.
doesn't it?
Exactly. Right.
Yeah.
Right. And trusting each other. You have to trust in other people and give them the benefit of the doubt. Yeah.
Yeah. Ease it. Trust isn't often something on a daily basis that we think about anymore, it seems like, and maybe we need to get back to that.
Mhm. Mhm.
Okay, so let's in our last segment wrap up with a couple more questions. And you're listening to Fresh Courage with Sharon Rolfe and my guest Shelley Parks talking about co-housing to beating back isolation. Thanks for listening. Come back soon. Sharon Rolfe coming back with Fresh Courage and my guest Shelley Parks, and we're talking today about co-housing. Kelly's got a couple more stories that we're gonna hear before we close up the program today. So, Shelley, take it away.
Yeah, thanks, Sharon. There's just so many moments, and I've visited a lot of co-housing communities all across the country, and there have always been these moments where I've just really it's illustrated well. So the first one was I was visiting a community in Portland and heard the story of this woman who was older and she had had a hip replacement, and of course the doctor asked her when they were getting ready to send her home, do you have anyone that can watch out and help out for you? And she said, well, yeah, I have like 28 friends, you know, so, right. That's co-housing, right? So of course, she just did very well because people were watching out for her and she loved to work in the yard. So she spent a lot of time working in the yard, but, knew that she would have help if she needed. Well, part of the support that the community gave her was making sure that someone checked in with her every single morning. And so there was someone assigned to do that. Well, one morning she had passed away in her sleep. So, the neighbor sent out an email to everyone, letting all the neighbors know that. And so someone arranged for all the kids to get together. And so they just timed it so that the kids could do this before school. They lined up along the walkway. And as, the coroner came and, took the body away, and as they rolled her by, the children all got to sing songs, and they had little little things, their little toys or whatever it was that they placed, as she was being rolled away as a ceremony, kind of an impromptu thing. And I was so touched when I heard that because that's such an illustration of how children can be part of a natural part of life, right?
Mhm.
And that the community could come together for that.
Hmm. How neat. Well,
Yeah.
and I that ties a little bit with my guest last week that we're talking about preschoolers and including death as part of something they learned in their learning center with the older senior community. You have a story about a gentleman who lost his wife too?
Yeah, there's another community that in the same year they had 2 home births and 2 home deaths in the same community. So of course, that created, the community coming together. But one specific thing that happened with that was a mom with a young, an infant. She needed to head to the common house for a meeting, but she didn't want to wake this new. I think the baby was a couple months old. Wake the baby up. So she just put a quick email out to the community. Hey, could anybody just sit on the couch? Let me know if the baby wakes up, and I'll come home. Well, it turned out that a gentleman that had lost his wife was the first one to respond, and he said, "Oh yeah, I can come sit on the couch and listen for a crying baby." So he came and sat on the couch. And of course, and this gentleman had never, he and his wife had always wanted children, but were never able to have children. So he always really treasured that opportunity to be around kids. But this was the first time he got to be a caregiver, right? Even if the baby was sleeping. Well, then as time evolved, he ended up being like a really true friend to this mom with this baby. And he was the go-to person she could always call. And his life was just very uh, enriched by being able to really be a part of this little baby's life, and it was pretty cool to hear that story.
I actually have a grandmother who passed the same day that on the other side of the family, a newborn was born. And I just treasure that synchronicity of the same happening the same day, which is just always been a real special moment in my life. But
Yeah,
not everybody connects those dots exactly either.
yeah.
So you have some ways that people can learn more about this, don't you, Shelley?
Yeah, I'm a big fan of the National Co-housing Association, and it's easy to remember. It's just cohousing.org. And they're a really great resource for all things co-housing. And if somebody would just like to dive in and learn more, I would definitely go to that association's website. And then, of course, I always love to talk about co-housing, so people are always welcome to reach out to me also.
Well, and you gave examples of where you went and saw some, kind of
Mhm.
like a Airbnb. Try it out and see if you want to live in this other state.
Yeah, yeah. Some communities actually do have rentals at times. Others will just do a day
Oh,
tour.
okay.
I think many communities just do it. I know coming up this next spring, there's always the National Co-housing Day, which a lot of communities will do open houses. So there are lots of ways to learn more for sure.
Is there one state that has more co-housing than other states?
Yeah, we have a lot of them here in Washington. There are a lot in California. Colorado has a lot of the Northeast. So kind of there are some pockets around the country, which again, on the association's website, there's actually a map where they show
Oh,
where
okay.
co-housing communities are.
Cool. Cool. So, let's see. Why don't you go ahead and give your email address and phone number for our audience?
Okay, great. My phone number, and you're always welcome to call me, is 425-308-0639. And I have a website, and it's Covision, so COV as in Victor, Vision Consulting. And my email, of course, on there would just be S Parks, so it looks like Sparks spelled out.
I love
Sparks,
it.
yeah, Sparks at covisionconsulting.com. So yeah, and always, if anyone has questions or would just like to know where they could learn more, I would be happy to talk.
Okay, again, her phone number is 425-308-0639. And you do have some free resource list on your website, didn't you?
Yep, there's a really great there's some resources of links to really good articles and TED Talks and other things about co-housing.
Oh, okay. I love TED Talks.
Mhm.
So you can contact me and my website. I'm effortlessvitality.org. And my little fabric art blocks are found on Quilted Petunia Etsy, and my store is called Quilted Petunia. And I do have a Facebook page, Effortless Vitality. And these podcasts are available on my website under the tab for podcasts. But I also do some YouTube weekly thought for the week that you might get a lot out of too. So I hope this has given you some new ideas about how you could be in community deliberately and on purpose. And it sounds like a rich way to go. I'm going to certainly look into it because, like I say, being single, I need to build isolation, combat isolation on a deliberate manner. So come back next week for our next show. We're going to talk to Dr. Dorian Mincer, and this on the next program of Fresh Courage. Thanks, Shelley, for joining me today, and I look forward to more podcasts with my audience. Thank you.
Thanks, Sharon.
Ready to take some liberties and call some shots? I know I am. Join in next week on Fresh Courage Radio. It's your time to shine with Sharon Rolfe on TransformationTalkRadio.com. If you still need some inspiration, let your curiosity lead you. Many still find their lives ruled by the clock, but you forge your own path. You are starting on a journey that will lead you outward, out of isolation, and inward to your true desires for life. There is no map where we're going, but let Sharon Rolfe be your guide in a new world of possibilities. Find your passion, find your reason, find your fun, and everything you dreamed of. Every week brings new insights and ideas to light your way and elevate your day. To learn more about Fresh Courage Radio with Sharon Rolfe, please visit effortlessvitality.org.